Right. Hello, everyone, as you're joining us. Welcome. Welcome, folks, as you get settled in. All right. So welcome, everyone, as you're joining. Thank you for joining us for Your Path to Policy. This is our 2027 CCST Policy Fellowship webinar. So my name is Bethany Hopkins. I am the Fellows Program Manager here at CCST. I'd like to open our webinar today by acknowledging we're hosting today's meeting from what we now call the state of California, which is home to many indigenous communities that have stewarded this land since time immemorial. So as the program manager for this fellowship for the past 3 years, I really can't overstate the value of this program. I've seen it be a life-changing opportunity for so many fellows, and I'm excited for all of you who are considering this opportunity. So today, I'll briefly introduce CCST and provide an overview of the fellowship. And then we will transition to our alumni panel, where our alumni from the fellowship can answer questions as you consider applying for the fellowship. One second as I transition here. So let me tell you a little bit about CCST first. So the California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization established in 1988 at the request of the legislature. And CCST exists to help make California's policies stronger with science and technology. So our mission is to serve as a trusted, nonpartisan source of expert science and technology advice for California policymakers, power a world-class partner network. And we're lucky to have this network of public and private higher education institutions, and federating with them, CCST provides services such as expert briefings, workshops, and peer-reviewed reports to the Capitol community. But we are, of course, most known for the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program, which you're all here to hear about today. In November, we welcomed this group here, our 17th cohort of CCST fellows who are currently working in their placement offices around Sacramento. And we're looking forward to the 18th year of the 18th cohort for CCST this fall. So since 2009, we've trained more than 200 PhD scientists and engineers in science policy. Our applications for this next cohort are open through March 2nd, with a fellowship that begins in November. So after a month of policy training, fellows are placed in the legislature, both the Assembly and Senate, state agencies, and offices of the governor. And they work on a variety of subjects. These are the 2026 placements that you can read about on our website. Topics such as energy, privacy, health, the environment, climate, water, emergency services, transportation, and just so much more. And there are many more placement opportunities. You can read more about them, these fellows and our past fellows on our website. So a few reasons that you might want to consider becoming a fellow. It is a great way to learn about how government works in California firsthand. You get to see how decision-making happens. You get to see the whole process. Second, you would get to use and leverage your analytical and scientific training to help advise decision makers and policymakers here in the state. It's also a really great way to gain professional skills. It's a way to build that leadership training, get the skills really quickly in that year. And as you're doing that, you also can build a lifelong professional network. It's a year of professional exploration and personal transformation. You're trying something new with a cohort of other folks working in policy. It's a great way to grow your network. So also a little bit about why California, why come to this state. It is the fourth largest economy in the world. It's also a national leader in a lot of science and technology topics and energy, environment, and tech. And the policies here really impact so many folks. They impact nearly 40 million residents of the state. But what's done here is often replicated in other states, in the nation, other countries. So your work can really have implications far beyond the state borders. And you don't have to have a strong California connection to apply to the fellowship. Our fellows do come from all over. Our 186 alumni represent 62 PhD institutions and 30 different states, territories, and countries. So you really, as long as you are interested in coming to California, learning about it, and serving the state, you can be a good fit for the fellowship. So let's dig into what you get out of the fellowship as well. Again, this is a direct experience fellowship program, an opportunity to learn by being placed, being embedded into an office. Each CCST fellow is embedded in an office, as we mentioned, either in the California State Legislature, state agencies, or offices of the governor. And fellows work as full-time staff in that office for the rest of the fellowship year. Alongside with that work experience, you also get a lot of support and training, all the things that you really need to be successful. The program begins with this month-long intensive orientation and training that we call our policy boot camp. You learn the ins and outs of California government and the policy-making process and the people before you begin. And then during the fellowship, we have professional development seminars and workshops. These are things to help you expand your network and learn new professional skills. We also sponsor field trips to enhance your understanding. And throughout the program, you receive mentorship from the alumni network. Lots of folks who have walked this road before. So speaking of our alumni, people are often curious, where do our alumni work? So most CCST Fellows alumni do go into policy-related careers after the fellowship, and many stay within the California state government. You can see there, that's the largest chunk of where people go after, about 36%. But many former fellows also work in nonprofits, private industry, academia, advocacy. There really is no one size fits all career path after the fellowship. You're free to decide wherever you want to go next. One thing a lot of alumni do express is this fellowship experience is instrumental to their career development. It opens opportunities they would have never known about while in their PhD or postdoc. Here's just a little bit from what one alumni got out of it. This is Bish Paul. He did his PhD in cell and molecular biology. He was a fellow about 9 years ago in the Assembly Committee on Elections and Redistricting. And he said, my journey with CCST shaped my commitment to inclusive policy making and my drive to ensure that all voices are heard in crafting policies that impact communities. Bish is now a senior policy advisor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So to return a little bit to the application details, eligibility for applying to this fellowship. If you're unable to hear me, I'm happy to repeat this and we can go over this later as well. Eligibility for the fellowship, you do need to have a PhD in a science, social science, or engineering field by September 15th, 2026. So you also need to be eligible to work on a full-time basis for a U.S. employer. And if you have further questions about that, there is an FAQ on our website, a good page where you can look and learn a little bit more. Application materials you'll need, the application form, a resume or CV, a personal statement, and 2 letters of recommendation. There's also more information that I posted here, and that's on our website about the compensation, the salary, the benefits, the relocation reimbursement, and professional development funds that we offer as part of this fellowship. A little bit more on the timeline and the tips. So you do need to submit all application materials by 11:59 p.m. on March 2nd, 2026. That's when the application closes. And then we expect to have finalist interviews by around early June with fellows selected in June. Training begins November and the placements start January. So it's a little bit about thinking through the timeline for the coming year. A few tips. So you do want to create your application profile first. That way you can save your progress and receive reminders. The second tip, you want to send your letter of recommendation requests early because you have to do that through the application portal as well. That gives your letter writers time, especially if they haven't written a letter for this kind of fellowship before, and time to work on it. And then the third tip that I like to give folks is make sure your personal statement answers why you are applying for the CCST Science Fellows Program, what you hope to bring to the program, and what you hope to take away. So here are some of the things that we're looking for in an applicant. So one thing that's helpful to understand here is working in policy will be a very different experience than grad school. In placement offices, there are hard deadlines, there's lots of teamwork. You're going to be working on subjects potentially not related to your technical expertise. It's a big culture change from academia. So this is what we're looking for in an applicant. Excellent communicators, both written and oral communication, folks who are flexible and adaptable and effective in fast-paced environments because things can change very quickly in the policy world, as well as folks who are open-minded and willing to learn. These are some of the critical things we're looking for, both in the application and in the interview. So that wraps up the short introduction part of the overview of the fellowship today. We're going to transition to the Q&A part soon. Please start preparing your questions for our alumni panel. You can use the Q&A function to do that. And if you have any questions that are really specific to you or that don't get addressed in this Q&A session, please connect with us on social media. You can follow up with me. I have my email there. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn as well. We want to try to help guide you towards an answer for your questions. All right, so now I would like to ask our panelists to come join me on camera today. We have 4 alumni who are here to share their experiences. And we're going to go in this order that you see on the screen. I'll stop sharing in a minute. We have Stephanie Choing, Jean Marie Gonzalez Sanborn, Taylor McKee, and Haynes Stevens joining us. So again, use the Q&A feature to submit your questions to our panel. I'm going to stop sharing, but first I want to ask you, as you introduce yourselves with your PhD, placement, and current role, if you could also help answer this question of why did you apply to and why did you choose the CCST Fellowship? So let's transition to that now. Stephanie, would you start us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Choing. I am a fellow from 2024, year 15, I believe. I have a PhD in chemistry, and for the term of the fellowship, I was placed with the Assembly Committee on Transportation, working on a lot of bills related to electric vehicles. I actually applied to CCST twice. I applied once around the time I was graduating grad school. And then I applied a second time about 7 years after I had graduated grad school. And the main reason for both of that was I wanted a career pivot away from bench science. And so, I elected for a job doing intellectual property for the first time and declined to advance further in the application process the first time. But about 7 years later, I was really looking for a change and had still a big interest in pursuing a career in public policy. So that's why I applied the second time, and it's worked out since. I think I'm supposed to say where I am right now. I'm at the CPUC. I'm working in broadband mapping, trying to get broadband to rural areas across the state.
Thanks. Jean Marie, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sounds good. Hi all. Really excited to see so many participants on this call today. My name is Jean Marie Gonzalez Sanborn. I was a year 23 fellow. I did my PhD in biomedical sciences at UCSF. My placement was in the Senate in the office of Senator Durazo. I'm now in state government still on the executive branch side at the California Energy Commission as a special advisor to our chair. I applied for CCST probably for similar reasons as a lot of the rest of the folks on this call. I want to make a difference and I wanted to transition into the science policy world. I'm a lifelong Californian, born and raised here. And I really felt like California was at the forefront of the policy world. And now, having been on the other side of it, I definitely think that impression was correct. It's really exciting to be somewhere that's ahead of so many things.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today. My name is Taylor McKee, and I have my PhD in oceanography from Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. My placement was in the Senate Environmental Quality Committee, and I had the opportunity to stay on with the committee, and so I am working full-time as a consultant at the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. I actually did not want to do CCST originally. I knew I wanted to go into policy for years. Like my first year of grad school, I was like, okay, I got to look into policy fellowships. I had my eye on the prize with AAAS, and a lot of colleagues had actually told me to apply to CCST to think about it. I was like, nope, I want to go to DC. When it came time to apply and I was leaving grad school, it was actually between the transition period of our presidency. And I just had some weird gut feelings. And, I decided to look at the CCST website and I was like, you know what? California is such a great state. I love being in San Diego. I love the people here. I love the issues we work on. We're such a leader in so many spaces, especially when it comes to climate and the environment. And so I took a chance with it and I have not regretted it since.
And I'll
Haynes.
wrap it up. Hey, everybody. My name is Haynes Stevens. I am a CCST class of 2025, same year as Taylor. I did my PhD at the University of Chicago in climate sciences and societal impacts. Um, and then for my placement at CCST, I was in the chair's office at the California Air Resources Board, also known as CARB, where I was helping to staff and advise Chair Leanne Randolph during her term, and then for a brief period, Chair Lauren Sanchez, who's the current chair. And currently, I am a new senior policy advisor at MCE Clean Energy, which is a community choice aggregator, essentially a electricity and energy service provider in the Bay Area that works as an alternative to PG&E, which is our local investor-owned utility in the state. And MCE really champions renewables and climate conscious energy investments as opposed to shareholder profits. And that's what we work on. And then why I applied and chose the CCST fellowship, I think is very similar to the answers you've heard before. I'll say in my framing, it was I entered grad school very interested in knowledge and a lot of learning. And over the course of being in grad school, I realized that what was going to give me a fulfilling feeling was to find a way to use and give that knowledge impact and give that scientific the skills and background I had service and make it used toward bettering society. And so I had a slow pivot sort of through my whole grad school process of finding out ways to be closer to the ground and be more practical in applying science and applying knowledge. And when it came down to wrapping up my PhD, I was very gung-ho about trying to do one of these policy fellowships as a way to get a foot in the door in these policy landscapes that, as a PhD student, I couldn't find where the opening was for me, just fresh out of academia. And I'm originally from California. I'm from the Bay Area. So being able to come back and serve in California to my home state and also work at a level of government that's a lot more fast and nimble than what the federal government is able to do, especially in these times, was a real sort of winning trait for me. Yeah. And so those are my reasons.
Excellent. Thank you so much, all. And I apologize if any of my audio cuts out at all. Still with you. Uh, First question I wanted to open up to any of our panelists. What were some activities that you did as a graduate student that turned out to be like helpful, transferable skills for the fellowship? And did you have any policy experience going into the fellowship?
I can start with this one. So I think the good news is what I found being in a ledge placement in the legislature and on committee specifically was my most valuable skill was from my PhD research. Just being able to think analytically, be able to synthesize a lot of complex information, be able to communicate it well, especially to policymakers. And to just sort of kind of have, be inquisitive, be curious, kind of push the needle on certain things and ask good questions. Like that really did influence my work on a day-to-day basis. But I will say it is important to get engaged in something. It doesn't have to necessarily be policy related throughout your graduate school experience or throughout your life experience. It could be anything because I think ultimately the policy space does have sort of this social aspect to it. It does have a problem solving aspect. Sometimes you're an event planner, in which I had to be this past year, putting on informational hearings and oversight hearings and such in the legislature. Even for agency roles, probably similar skill sets are needed there. So any sort of extracurricular activity that you do outside of your research does also contribute to skill building, social skills, all sorts of things that are important in these roles.
I can piggyback onto that and just saying that I had some experiences. Our campus had a science policy group that I joined, but the activity there sort of had its ups and its downs. And then I tried when I could to get involved in science communication or public science days, just things where you're getting out of the lab or getting out of whatever your building or office is and talking about science with either policymakers or people who don't have the same exact niche expertise background that you have, and learning a lot of those social skills, or I would say buffing up on those social skills. Hopefully, you already have some. And then learning a lot of that science translation and how can you take knowledge and communicate it at various levels of complexity or detail to people to get them to understand the core concepts and be able to sort of have a conversation going from there. And I think those were really helpful in um, preparing me for the policy realm.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Taylor and Haynes both said. I did, a few small policy related things. I was on a research policy committee at my university, and a few other committee type things. But I think, echoing what Taylor said, it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you're doing something out of the lab. And both Haynes and Taylor said exactly right. Like building social skills outside the lab, being able to talk to people who aren't just in your specific discipline are super important. And then you'll have a lot of other translational skills from your actual research work. But yeah, I think just being kind of a well-rounded person is important.
Excellent. So we're getting some questions about letters of recommendation. Any thoughts and guidance on who you asked to write your letter of recommendation? What would be good to have in that letter of recommendation for people who are thinking about that as part of their.
Yeah, I could start. The second time I applied, I asked two of my bosses at my workplace at the time. But prior to that, I had asked professors that I had worked with or collaborated with on various projects, including my PI. I know that a lot of people might not have the best relationship with their principal investigator. And so some of those people who I know became fellows ended up relying a lot on other professors that they had worked with in terms of getting recommendation letters from them. But I think, there's a number of skills that are really important for um, applying or, presenting in your application to CCST. And I think, it's an opportunity for you to highlight, things that you don't think you've gotten across in your application, whether it's represented in the activities you've done or the publications or presentations you've made. So it's a lot of things that are intangible, soft skills, your dedication to, public service or community outreach, those sorts of things that, aren't really represented by just straight numbers or bullet points on your resume.
Yeah, and I can speak as someone who didn't have their PI as a letter of rec. I had a pretty harrowing experience with my principal investigator, and so I ended up not asking them for a letter of rec and instead chose more colleague or research partners and collaborators that I had experience with. And I sort of ended up going with a variety of recommendation writers, from people who knew my research very well to a professor who I had a really close relationship with, who I actually didn't do any research with, but felt that they could speak to my passions and my abilities in academia, but also in the how I conduct myself and what I am sort of passionate about in doing for the impact of science and why I wanted to make this transition from academia to policy. And so I was able to field rec writers from various aspects of my grad school, not just directly tied to whatever my thesis was, and not just directly tied to my PI or who my PI knew. And it ended up working out. So can say it's at least one winning case for that. So yeah, if you've had any sort of maybe feel like non normal route or experience in your PhD, there are ways to still get the rec writers that can give you an effective application, even if they're not your traditional people.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie and Haynes. This question is for any or all of you. It's about placement. So what is the placement process like? How do fellows get placed? And did you have any input? Do fellows have any input into that placement process?
I'm happy to start off. So there are a lot of offices that are very excited about having CCST fellows, far more than we have CCST fellows. So you get to interview with many different offices. Afterwards, there is a ranking process on your end where you kind of rank how you feel. You can talk to other fellows to see what their interview experiences are like. And we also had some really great conversations with CCST staff that were more general about what we're looking for in our fellowship year experience. And then after that, CCST, they talk to the offices, they talk to us, and based on those rankings and everything, they facilitate the placements, which I know is different than in some other offices, but I really feel like CCST was there every step of the way and was really helpful in making sure our needs and interests were looked after. And for myself, for my top three ranked choices, I had a personal office, I had a committee placement, and I had an executive branch placement. So I know a lot of folks come in with some predetermined idea of what they're looking for. And I found like there was such a diverse range of offices I was interested in and would have been happy in.
I'll just add, I think someone asked in the chat whether it's predetermined, which I'm not sure. There are some recurring offices that tend to get fellows every year. Synod Q is the only office to have had a fellow every single year of the fellowship. We like to tout. So there's some anticipation. I don't think it determines who's selected as a fellow, but typically offices will submit their request for a fellow kind of after training has happened, after fellows have been selected. And then fellows will kind of have their choice of where they want to go, who they want to rank, and then the placement offices will do the same. And then there's a matching process, which, sorry, I don't know if I missed if Jean Marie already went over that, but CCST works its magic and sort of decides where's the best fit for each fellow in each office.
Yeah, and I'll just highlight that that's a two-way matching process. So you are, as a fellow, are listing your favorite or your ranking of top to bottom of the offices, and then the offices themselves are also ranking the fellows that they want based off of the interview process. And so you get matched. ideally to an office that you rank high and that also ranked you highly, and typically falls within like your top three, top four offices.
And then with a little bit on the interview process, there are some of like informal interviews. CCST will have a happy hour where offices just come and meet fellows informally. They encourage you not to talk about work, not to talk about your PhD, just sort of have a vibe check, have fun. And that's sort of the first round of interviews. And then the second round of interviews is more formal. There's a 30-minute interview with each office, and you can tell CCST which offices you want to interview with. Typically, they encourage that you interview with all of them, which sometimes can be over 30. But you'll interview over the course of 2 weeks in December. And then after about mid-December, they'll do the matching process.
And piggyback number two is during this whole placement process, you are encouraged highly to talk to as many former fellows as possible and alumni, because a lot of them will have been in that office or know something about that office and can give you some insight or guidance that you can't just get from your one-on-one interview with the person. And so that's a huge intel gathering of learning a lot about the culture, the color of an office, what their history has been like with fellows in the past and things like that, that can give you a lot more info on to inform your rankings.
Excellent. Thank you all for describing your experiences with that. I'm wondering if you can describe a little about what a typical work week was like for you as a CCST fellow, and also maybe compare a little, how is it different from the pace of work or the type of work you were doing week by week in academia?
I can start, and I also see I'm the only legislative fellow on the call. So I will try my best to speak for both personal offices and committee staff, which, defer to other personal office alumni if you can. So it's very fast paced here in the legislature. As committee staff, I get to work on bills that are introduced by both senators and assembly members in the state of California. That anything specifically for Senate environmental quality that pertains to the nexus of human health and the environment. So think everything the California Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So that's air quality, water quality, hazardous waste. In this case, the California Environmental Quality Act, pesticides, we cover everything in that sort of nexus. And so if a bill is introduced there, we analyze it. We sort of talk to different stakeholders in this space. We see what issues come up. We synthesize all of this information. We brief the chairs of our committee on just like what's the deal with these sorts of bills, what's important to highlight here, where should we recommend amendments, and also what problem are we trying to solve and how are we going to solve it in an effective way that can be implemented by agencies. This looks like having a lot of meetings, especially during the session. This looks like a lot of listening, a lot of engaging with different stakeholders. Sometimes it looks like organizing informational and oversight hearings, which also includes a lot of meetings, a lot of interacting with different folks. And then you get into your analysis phase, which for me was very similar to my PhD. In which I got to sort of synthesize all this information, write it out in a written analysis, and then communicate it to my chair, my boss, in order to, make recommendations on certain bills, aye votes versus no votes, as well as recommend to committee staff on how their bosses should be thinking about this legislation that comes through. Adversely, for personal offices, they get the opportunity to run bills for their boss or for their member. And so they get to kind of undergo the full legislative cycle as well as engage on any issues that their member cares about.
I can jump in here from the perspective of someone who's not in the legislature anymore, but was during my fellowship. I was in a personal office, and I think Taylor summarized it very well. I think just to contrast, in a personal office, you usually have a broader suite of topics. So I covered energy, transportation, health, and agriculture. So very wide range of topics. My boss was actually on the Senate Energy Committee, which meant I had to provide her vote recommendations for all the bills that went for that committee. Typically, members will sit on, typically, bills will go through a policy committee where a select group of members will more closely examine the bill before they go to the floor where every member will vote. And so those members will pay more close attention to those types of bills. So a lot of it, right, is briefing your member, providing detailed your analysis of these bills, and then, like Taylor said, shepherding your boss's own bills through the process. I would say, as compared to committee staff, there's a lot of stakeholder engagement, maybe less engagement directly with agencies, maybe a little bit more on the political side, jumping back and forth between a wider range of topics. Really just depends on what you're interested in, but I think they're both great. In terms of how it compared to my PhD, I felt like a really crazy day was still like nothing compared to a really long day in the lab on like a high stakes experiment. I personally felt like the work-life balance was better in the legislature than it was in academia. Again, my own personal experience, everyone will feel differently, but that was how I felt.
Yeah, I can share some input from someone who was placed in the executive branch during their fellowship. If you are going through your PhD and looking for any semblance of sustainability or work-life balance or just stabilization, the exec placements are pretty good at that. They all, I would say a lot of the exec employees will stick to a 40-hour work week, 9 to 5. There may be a day or two where you have something that's due the very next morning, so you may work on it till 6. But I would say there are more often days where you can get to 4:30 and maybe not have much to do for that rest of that day. So it was very much more structured, much more for me chill than my PhD experience. And the people I had around me also were supportive of keeping that work-life balance and keeping those professional barriers. Yeah, and I would say the difference between my PhD work and the work I did in my placement office was for my PhD, a lot of it ended up being funneled down to my thesis projects. So 3 projects that I might work on at various times. And difference in the executive placement, and specifically at the Air Resources Board, was just you could be working on 10 or more projects at a given time, but putting in maybe a half an hour in one of these and an hour in one of these in a day. And it just can be a lot more smaller projects that you are managing over a week. Still nothing that takes you into the midnight hours, but it's just keeping track of those things and making sure that you've got this communication to this person or you've delivered this product to this person in a timely manner. So there's a lot more of just managing those parallel projects versus you might be deep in one project in your PhD or deep in one set of experiments. And so that's definitely a learning adjustment that I had to make during my fellowship process.
Thank you. We've got a question here about relocation. So, what was it like relocating here to Sacramento for the fellowship? How far in advance did where did you decide to be in Sacramento? How did you adjust to living in the city? Tell us about that relocation to Sacramento. And any of you, as I know, none of you were here before, so anyone?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I was originally in San Francisco prior to the fellowship. CCST offers some amount of money. I forget how much exactly, Bethany, but a small amount of money to help you relocate to Sacramento. And you are expected to be in Sacramento by the start of November training for the, policy boot camp. But I actually found it quite easy coming from San Francisco. I would say, that's a huge caveat. But there were a lot of places that were available for rent in Sacramento downtown and in the neighboring areas. Um, and so it was not for those of you who are not from California, it's not scary. Don't worry about it. Sacramento is much less stressful in terms of trying to find a place. It was, I think, a weather adjustment primarily for me. San Francisco is quite cold, and Sacramento can get quite hot and also a little bit cold during the winter. So that was an adjustment. But from a community and cultural standpoint, I actually really enjoyed moving to Sacramento for the year. It was a really vibrant, welcoming community. There's so much going on just in terms of music and arts, and everybody's really friendly there, even, within the government, but outside of the government. And so I think if you've ever contemplated coming to California, if you haven't been here before, Sacramento is actually a really great place to start.
Yeah, I can add on top of that. I moved from Seattle, Washington, into Sacramento, which was an absolute pain. But CCST did make it a lot less painful. They gave me a relocation stipend. I believe it my year was 3 or 4 thousand, which for interstate moving, we had to go with like U-Haul pods that got shipped down to Sacramento for us, and that essentially covered that, which would have been a huge, affordability barrier if that weren't provided. So very grateful for that. And then echoing what Stephanie said, if you're coming from a big city, Sacramento will probably feel like a small town, and if you're coming from a small town, Sacramento will probably come feel like a big city. But it's got that variation of all those different types of living landscapes where you could be in midtown or downtown and have a lot of that noisy city life with a lot of shops and restaurants. You can go be in a little more residential neighborhood like Land Park or something, and you can get more single family homes and, nice walking streets, and sort of everything in the middle. If you really want to go out, you can go deep into the burbs and get a really big house for not as much money. Um, and so depending on what your like taste is or what you're interested in doing in your residential life, I think there's a lot of pockets of Sacramento that can sort of accommodate that. And you can kind of find what you want out of that.
Awesome. Thank you both for answering. All right, I've got a question here for you all. Is there anything you wish you knew more about before starting the fellowship? Something you would have done to prepare, kind of looking back?
I can start off with this one. One thing that, kind of in the first question, we were talking about, well, what did we do during our grad school? And I feel like I was involved in a lot of policy related things. But when I got here, none of it really translated over. And so one thing that I see often in this space is interns and just people working for district offices and fellows and kind of other sense of getting involved just in the space. I wish I had done more of that. I wish I had like familiarized myself with state processes, or local, just even local government processes, understanding how like, electeds relate to their constituents and engage with them, kind of getting more knowledge based on like the political aspect of things. And now that I'm actually in the legislature, one thing that I would really like to do going forward, and I wish I had done more of in my graduate experience, is just kind of understanding like policy, the science of policy. So like getting like a master's in like, political science, or just taking a few courses, whether it's like workshops or conferences around just policy making, I think would have been really helpful. Is it necessary for the fellowship? No. But does it sort of add to your skill set and what you can bring to these conversations? Absolutely.
Yeah, I can follow up on that. I think for me, there were two big things. One was uh, I came out of my PhD fighting a lot of imposter syndrome going into the science policy fellowship, and realizing that I had expertise in this one small niche, but there was a lot I didn't know, and felt like that was something that I was hiding from people. And if they found out, they would, realize that maybe they're giving me too much credit. And I would say once I got into the fellowship and started interacting with people, that wasn't the case at all. People know that you're smart because you did a PhD. And if you could learn as much as you learned in your PhD thesis, you could do the same thing in a different subject, and you're pretty primed to do that quickly. And I think people understand that, and that starts to show pretty early on as you take into your placement office. So I guess in the framing of the question, I just wish I'd sort of processed through that earlier to be able to show up with more of confidence and less of being like, I'm pulling the wool over someone's eyes and handing them something that I maybe looked at research for this for like an hour before I wrote it down. And in your thesis, that would be inexcusable. But in the policy realm, that's what a lot of people do. You look up stuff really quickly, you synthesize it, and you get it to somebody who needs to use it. And then I will say, in tandem to the imposter syndrome, is that your PhD knowledge and exact expertise will probably matter 0% in what you do in your placement, even if it is in the same area. Like I studied climate stuff, but when I went to the Air Resources Board, none of what I studied was like no papers I was looking at or anything were directly applicable to the work I was doing in the Air Resources Board. The background is there, and that helped, I'm sure, a little bit, but um, whether or not you want to do what your PhD is in or whether or not you want to change, it's all equally accessible, equally flexible because that is sort of the nature of policy. It's just going to get a lot broader and a lot less in depth that like a lot of us have done in our PhDs.
Great, thank you. Got a question here. At what point in the fellowship were you applying for your next roles? And how did you balance that search for your next position with doing the fellowship itself?
I can start off here. I think the advice we got was to maybe start looking around halfway through. We, at least when I was in the fellowship, we did a retreat where they really gave us some really helpful tools for career exploration. And I think that was sort of the perfect jumping off point. So I definitely started thinking about it then, and then looked a lot more closely going the few months before the fellowship ended and then a couple months after and started a new role in January of the year after my fellowship ended. So I totally depends on the person, but I think that general framework tends to work for folks. And I definitely wouldn't worry about like starting like right when you start the fellowship because you're going to learn so much and be exposed to so many new types of work that you had no idea existed. So like definitely take some time to like marinate in Sacramento and learn about all the opportunities around you.
Yeah, I'll just jump, follow that. I think Jean Marie said it pretty well, start about midway through, and it really depends on the person in terms of, what you're looking for, what your timeline is, what any financial constraints are. But in terms of the workload that you're doing during the fellowship as you're looking for a job, those things will vary depending on your placement. But in general, there's plenty of time that is afforded to you, um, during the fellowship to look for a job. And there's a lot of support that CCST provides in those later months to make sure that you're trying to find something that fits for you because they do want you to stay in policy long term if that's what you want.
Yeah, and I'll say I think a lot of the legislative cycle coincides when if you're in the legislative placement, legislative branch, the cycle will coincide with when you want to start job searching. I think a lot of the work starts to simmer down toward the latter half or third of the placement, and then you can spend a lot more time just focusing on your career search. And in the exec branch, at least in my placement office, I know a lot of fellows basically have an understanding with their mentors that this is a 1 year fellowship and it has a fixed end date. And towards the end of that, you're going to need to look for a new job. So um, odds are your placement office and your mentor that you're linked with, all knows this. And by the time it gets to that second half and that back end, they're going to be understanding of the fact that you're going to be, filling out applications, being on the search for any leads or links and openings. And ideally, you could start having those check-ins with them on that back end of how is this career search going? How are you guys doing? Is there any way we can help? So there's a lot of support and a lot of understanding for the fact that this is going to have an end date and you want to be employed after that still.
Yeah, one of the other things I'll add, Haynes reminded me of this. So one of the things that CCST teaches you very early on is the importance of networking. So having coffee chats with people who work in government, people who work outside of government, former fellows. So actually, early as the first month that you're in the fellowship, you are connecting with alumni to understand what their path through the fellowship was and where they ended up and how they got there. So I actually spoke to Jean Marie when I was looking for a job, and she helped me, talk about some of the things I wanted in terms of how to figure out what to prioritize for job hunting. And the great thing about CCST is that it's a large enough community of alumni that there's probably someone who's done something that you want to do already. But it's small enough that, everybody's happy to connect with you and still provide support. And I mean, even Jean Marie sent me a bunch of job, postings saying like, hey, I know you might be interested in this. Here's that. So it's a really great support system that CCST provides, not only through the program directly, but through the alumni network.
Yeah. And if I can follow, Stephanie actually sent me the link that ended up being the job I currently have. So the network is huge. It's very helpful. You're not bothering anybody. Everyone is very generous with their time and with their help. And it is, I would imagine, I don't have data, but it's by far the like most common way people will find a job after the placement is through somebody who's in their placement office or a former fellow or someone they've met throughout this past year. Very common.
Yeah, sorry, I just have to piggyback off of that because it was one of my fellow classmates who introduced me to someone they knew, who introduced me to like my future boss. So yes, definitely seconding what everyone said.
You can really see the network work at work here, essentially, and how critical that was for folks finding their next steps. Thank you all. I have a question here about after the initial like boot camp training, are there more opportunities for like learning and training and development throughout the fellowship? Did you pursue like any additional things outside of what CCST provides? Like what was your experience with like additional learning and developing yourself during the fellowship?
I mean this in the best way possible. There are too many things for growth development, all the sort of things you can do outside of your placement. For me, I ended up just going to a lot of them early on and being like, okay, I need to say no to a few of these and pick out the ones. But there is a plethora and wealth of just like seminars that you will do as part of the fellowship process. Happy hours you can go to meet people and learn more about their work or get included in a network that maybe you're interested in. There's all sorts of after work or weekend activities that are, going to help you in your development or um, give you sort of exposure or integration into this area or this network that you might be wanting to pursue as a career path. And they come on top of all the new learning and all the development that you're just doing in your placement. Like that is also going to feel very new and very much um, like you're just doing this all for the first time and getting a grip on that. And then on top of that, if you've got the bandwidth, if you've got the energy, you can do something after work or you can do something on the weekends that'll further even advance your skills and grow yeah, grow yourself.
All right. No one has anything else to add on that. Great. I'd like to ask a little bit about what advice you would give for applicants when they're thinking about the interview process? We're not sharing, the exact questions or assignments or anything, but can you discuss a little bit about how to prepare for and navigate the interview process for this fellowship?
So with the interviews, there's sort of two rounds, if we haven't mentioned that. One is sort of like a get to know you, sort of your typical interview questions. And then the next one is sort of a continuation of that plus an assignment. And then at some point, you do interview with the entire board of CCST. They do provide you with a mentor. So after you pass your first round of interviews, you get a alumni mentor who can sort of help you out with the interview process. And so you can use that to your discretion. I was lucky to be taking a policy writing class as I was interviewing. And so I used some of those skills, but then I also like sent over my draft of my assignment to my alumni mentor, who was super helpful. It's good to just practice generally for any interviews, but it's also good to sort of just brush up on what's going on in terms of like how California does its policies. And so you can look at, briefers that people write, one pagers that people write, try to get a sense of like how they write them. And there's sort of an opportunity to just see to use your own skills, even if you have no idea how any of this stuff works to contribute. But there are some ways that you can also learn how to make your application a little bit stronger.
And I'll piggyback off Taylor's answer. In my experience with the interview experience, with my experience with the interview process, um, what seemed to be much more important than the what was the how and the why. And I mean that in terms of like what you studied in your PhD and all the important big little numbers, crazy things you discovered or figured out is not as important to communicate as how you approached a problem, got to an answer, worked with other people, or what drove you through this process and what gave you the motivation and drive to, complete your PhD and all the piecemeal projects in between. And I think communicating that as you're doing practices in prep for the interview process is huge. If you've never heard of the STAR method, I would highlight looking up the STAR method and using that because that's just like gives you a framework and a wording for how to answer an interview question that's super helpful and helps keep you on track in your answers. And yeah, I think talking again or targeting about how you collaborated, work with people, a lot of these skills you'll do in the policy sphere, which are soft skills or communicative and relationship skills, would be things to highlight and note, in addition to, all the uh, really impressive things you know or learned during your PhD.
All right. Thanks for those tips on interviewing. So, thinking about your careers in policy, do you have a sense now of what steps in your career look like, what, your pathway is now that you've done the fellowship? And did the fellowship, kind of help prepare you or help you find a pathway as you?
I guess I can start. I would say the fellowship was invaluable for finding a pathway. I literally, like, I work at the California Energy Commission now, which is our state energy and policy planning organization. I had no idea that the California Energy Commission even existed. I knew almost nothing about energy. So I definitely credit CCST fellowship, the conversations I had with people with helping me find a path. And I love the work that I'm doing and I can see a path within my organization and definitely paths to stay in the policy field. So, I mean, I highly recommend the fellowship for helping expose you to the types of paths that are available.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that statement. I think for me, policy was still sort of a black box when I was in graduate school. And all I really wanted to do was just make a more tangible difference than what my research was allowing me to do. And I feel like not only CCST, but like my placement office and just like the space that is state government, um, exceeded my expectations and what that looks like. And I, truly had no idea what that would look like, but I'm continuing to learn what that looks like. And it's really cool to see the types of things you can do in these roles. And I don't think I would have this experience if it wasn't for CCST. So I'm really grateful for it.
Great, thank you. Um, can you talk a little bit about the benefits of the fellowship that you experienced that were specific to your placement? Some of the things that you gained from being in your specific placement office.
Yeah, I can talk about being in the chair's office at the Air Resources Board. If anyone's interested, cannot highlight enough. It's a sick place to be. There are two placements in CCST historically where you get to be in the chair's office of an agency, one at the Air Resources Board, and one at the California Energy Commission. And as part of that placement at CARB, I got to be in the chair's office, working with the chair, staffing the chair, which is super high profile, a lot of shaking hands, kissing babies, a lot of going to like panel events and writing talking points for that, or going to meetings with, CEOs of whatever company or leaders of whatever other agency. And that was just access that um, the majority of people at this agency don't have because they are not in the chair's office. And you get that for, your 1 year experience. And that was invaluable. And in addition to that, I also got to work inside CARB with the staff, program staff is what they're called, and the people who are actually doing the regulation development and doing a lot of the research within the agency and a lot of the gears and the churning of how the agency runs. And so you get that involved with the card placement. And then you also get to work with our legislative affairs office, who is looking at current bills in the session and giving their inputs and having meetings to discuss bills and potential amendments and things that. So you do also get a dabble in the ledge branch work with that. And so just having that trio of chair's office, program staff level, and legislative affairs office is just an incredible smorgasbord to be able to do in 1 year. And I think was very invaluable to what I could speak to in terms of my experience and skills for my next job, where there were a lot of questions that I was fielding in job interviews where I could go to one of those three to answer that. And I didn't feel like I was lacking an area or couldn't come up with an answer to a question because I had that diversity. So that was really cool. And yeah, very special part of that placement office.
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that. So I'm now working in our chair's office at the Energy Commission. So definitely agree with what everything Hayden said based on our fellows' experience. And I was in a personal office, and what I would say that you kind of uniquely get in a personal office. Well, first of all, backing up, I think just even having a year of legislative experience gives you like a huge step up. There's a lot that you can't understand until you've been in the building, whether that's committee staff or personal office staff. I think being in a personal office, you get to understand a little bit more of the politics behind things, which is not to say necessarily I'm a very political person, but understanding how politics and people and policy all play a role in terms of what actually ends up getting passed is like a really important skill. It's, a very fast-paced environment, which is useful to learn how to work in that environment. And I felt like it was really fascinating. All of the bills I worked on, had totally different pathways to success. Some of these had been efforts that had been going on for years and years. And it was really interesting to see different types of pathways that policies could take to be successful in the end. So I found that was really insightful behind the scenes understanding of like what it takes to get things accomplished.
Yeah, I'll just add, and totally agree with both what Haynes and Marie are saying. It's just a one of a kind experience. I think being a committee consultant, that's actually, and I didn't know this before coming here, but it's like one of the most sought after jobs in the political science space. People will tell me, "Wow, you have my dream job," and I'm like, I just graduated from school. Oops. Um, And people will work for 10 years, 10 plus years to get one of these positions, and then they will get the position and retire in the position. So these positions also rarely ever open up. And CCST has made an incredible arrangement to have positions in both the Senate and the Assembly as committee consultants. The types of engagements I've gotten to see, the types of conversations I've gotten to be a part of, the negotiating of amendments and being able to sort of influence or weigh in with the chair on how we should move with certain legislation. It's just something I wouldn't have imagined doing 5 years ago in my PhD program. And so it's really one of a kind experience that CCST has worked out. I don't think you can get an opportunity to be a committee consultant like straight out of grad school or mid-career scientist. Even mid-career scientists, good luck trying to get into this space without having some sort of entry point or fellowship into these spaces, because these spaces are also really hard to get into. And so it's a really great opportunity through CCST if you are looking to be on committee staff and influence policy in such a way.
Hey, Bethany, I think we're on to the next question.
Great. Thank you for continuing while I dealt with my Wi-Fi. So I think we're going to have this question and maybe wrap up pretty soon. Can you share a little about what kind of novel insights you gained from your role that are applicable to policy, but maybe things you didn't know about in graduate school? So any insights that you've gained from now working in the policy world that you wouldn't have known about in grad school?
So I'll say they tell you all the time here that it's not just about the science. It's not just about, what you've learned or, how scientists may view a certain perspective on the world. One thing that I think we all kind of gain in our different placements is just how the economy might come into play. Affordability is a word we care a lot about in California. Equity is something we care a lot about here as well. And just sort of understanding more of the political environment and the different factors that impact. Sometimes it's more technical, like as part of the Environmental Quality Committee, we can't always, to be super objective in these roles, we can't always, say, well, this is the best thing for the environment because this may also impact groceries in our grocery stores. And so certain decisions have sensitivities that we have to weigh in and, take into account. So I think having sort of that interdisciplinary perspective on how different issues touch on different parts of people's lives is something really valuable that you gain in your placements.
Yeah, I'll add here. I think another thing that you gain appreciation for in the fellowship is the importance of negotiation and understanding how incremental each step in, every word you change or every policy that you push forward is important, even if you don't end up reaching, the higher goal of what you think is best. As Taylor was saying, there's a number of factors that come into play and a number of constituencies and politics and egos that are all in play. And so it's not as straightforward as just, this is a fact and this is not a fact. It's much more complex. And I think one of the things I gained was a really deep appreciation of how difficult it is for politicians, for government staff, and everybody who's involved in the policy space to actually make change that's meaningful.
Yeah, Stephanie, what you're saying reminded me of something which I found that yeah, the end result may not be like exactly what you envisioned, but and something Taylor said about negotiating amendments, when you're working through a bill, oftentimes you have to talk a lot to the opposition. And one, you can have very friendly interactions with someone who's working on an opposing view from you and still have a very professional relationship, which I didn't know would be a thing, but is, and I very much enjoyed. And then two, it's really important to talk to people who have different opinions, because often you can work out compromises and agreements than if you had not had those conversations. So yeah, just that ability to bring everyone to the table and talk to everyone, I think is something that is super important.
Excellent. So we're about to wrap up here. We're almost at time. So I'd like for all four of you to provide one final brief word of advice to prospective applicants to the CCST Fellowship. Who wants to start us off?
Sure, I'll go. If you have any inkling that you might be interested in policy at all, you should apply to CCST. If you get it, it's a life-changing experience for the better. And I think, a lot of the fellows who were in my cohort, who made it through the process, they, like Haynes, suffered a lot of imposter syndrome, but I don't think you should feel like an imposter. Everybody who has gone through a graduate program has the skills necessary to succeed, and you can succeed at CCST. Even if you don't get into CCST, it's still worth applying, and it's still worth learning about all of the opportunities that are available across this policy sphere. So I really do encourage you to apply.
Yeah, I'll basically echo what Stephanie said. If you have any feeling that you could enjoy this or this could be a fulfilling experience, then just shoot your shot, go for it. At best, it becomes, something that changes your career path. At worst, it's a year you spent just doing a really novel and unique experience. I know people have done this and gone back to academia, so it doesn't in any way close off your openings. If anything, it just opens you up to a insane number of potential new career pathways. And I would say uh, in the application process and in any of the statements you write, um, an echoing of what I said in an earlier question is your value in the application process is not to show how much you know, it's to show how much you can learn and how good you are at being able to learn, which is going to be this fellowship experience. It's going to be a lot of having to learn and get up to speed very quickly with things that are already moving. And your PhD knowledge or your PhD experience is useful because you honed all those skills. It's not for you to prove how much you know in this one particular area. So focus on all the ways in which you are able to approach problems, do analysis, work with other people as strengths in your application process.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of a piece of what Haynes said. This fellowship really is for anybody. Like, if you are just like, I want something different, I'm mid-career and I just want to experience policy, or I want to learn the process. What a way to throw yourself in there. And you learn better by doing. And CCST helps you do. So you learn how this place works. And that is even a valuable set of skills to take back to whatever field or career path you want to go back to, of just understanding how government and state government and local government work. Um, on the flip side, if you're looking to get away from academia, this is absolutely a great place to start. That was my personal goal. I wanted to go into policy. I wanted to stay into policy. I took a risk because I was like, I don't even know if I'll like policy. Still figuring it out, but I definitely feel like CCST put me in a step in the right direction. And I think ultimately for anyone who wants to make a tangible difference, who wants to do good in this world, government is a good place to be a lot of the time. It may not seem like that most of the time, but it can be. And it depends on the staff and the people who make it up. And so, it's important to give it a shot and try it. And this is a great opportunity. And if you want to make a difference, I encourage you to apply.
Jean Marie?
Yeah, happy to round it off. I mean, echoing what everyone said, please, if you have any interest at all, apply to the CCST fellowship. As in terms of advice, like while you're applying, don't be afraid to ask people for help, have people look over your application, do practice interviews with folks. If you know any former CCST fellows, just reach out to them and chat, have an informational interview. Working with others will like only make you and your application stronger.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone who joined us today and for bearing with some technical difficulties. Remember that the applications for the CCST Fellowship close on March 2nd. And if you'd like to view this recording, it will be on our YouTube, on our website. We will be sharing it. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. And thank you so much, panelists.